Okay, so I think we're going. Yep. So this is Group One. This is Kevin Cronin,
Greg Allen here.
and so let's start with the creative responses.
Yeah, so I can lead off first if that's all right. So in my creative response, one of the bullet point options was to look at a picture that you took or you were a part of, and talk about how it kind of relates to the topic. So the other day, uh, I coach high school golf over at Spackenkill High School. And the other day, we had our last tournament of the year, and we took a photo. And although it's a pretty generic photo of five kids just kind of standing there, on the surface, that doesn't really relate to what we're talking about here. But when I looked at it and thought about it a little further, I found that it kind of does, in the sense that golf is an expensive sport that people who are living in poverty simply can't play because they don't have the opportunity to buy the equipment or pay for the lessons or pay the fee at the course that you have to pay to actually play the sport. If you look at sports like soccer or basketball, for example, if you have a ball and a few friends and a goal, then you're pretty much good to go. But golf is a little different. So I was looking at the photo and I was thinking, wow, like, all of the players on my team have the opportunity to do this thing because of what their families and what their parents have set up for them, in the sense that their parents are well off enough to be able to pay for the equipment and to be able to get them private lessons. So, just looking at this whole concept of how parenting relates to social class and how social class relates to parenting. These parents were able to give their kids opportunities um, based off of their social class and their financial status. So I thought that it was an interesting way of comparing um, it to everything that we read and watched in the videos and in the articles.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean literally as you were saying that about the like difference between soccer and golf. Like I was thinking like yeah, golf is also kind of like a status thing. Like, and then once you said that, I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, so that would kind of like clicked in my head in that sense. Um, I mean, like plus like there's also like a ton of commodification in golf. Like you have to have the bag, you have to have the different clubs, you have to have the driver, you have to have the
Yeah,
putter. You got to have like all of that stuff that's probably made some in some like third world country or something to that effect,
right.
where they make it for like minimal wages and situations like that, so they can ship it over here to America, where we then pay like a whole bunch of money for it, um,
Yeah,
so we could then go play 9 holes on the golf course. Um, but like, yeah, I mean that kind of ties into certain elements of like what I um, wrote about, because like I kind of went into like a number of like sort of theoretical aspects of it. Like I did. I don't think I talked about the commodification of goods in like Marxist theory or anything like that. In my creative response, I think I kind of went in a direction of like there's one aspect of Das Kapital, which is one of Marx's big works on the subject, um, where he's explaining how like workers of the industrial sort of revolution time were losing their jobs to like machinery and stuff like that, like the sort of new technologies that were coming in and sort of like replacing manpower.
Right.
And it was just like kind of interesting to me how like sort of relevant that is, especially just like in terms of like say like McDonald's where you have like people being replaced by the sort of like touch screen elements and things of that nature. Um, I feel like I kind of went off on a bit of a tangent there, but trying to pull it back to where I was. So like yeah, it's basically just like it kind of made me think about the commodification element of it, where like goods and services become like separated from the individual who actually puts time into creating those goods and services, and like we don't even think about it. Like
Right.
the person who made those golf clubs, we don't think about that person at all while we're hitting the ball with the 9 iron or something like that. So like that was just kind of a bit of a random tangent that I went on there, but that was primarily like what my creative response was about.
Nice. So if we can move forward a little bit here and
Actually,
talk
yes. Oh, sorry.
talk
What,
about one of the professor questions, which was from your readings in film, what were some factors that influence the lack of social mobility among poor families in the US? And a few things that I thought stood out to me were the idea that you know when we think about social mobility, it's often really hard to move out of that. If you're born into a poor family, a lot of times you end up poor as an adult. And when you think about why that might be, I think part of it is the idea that if your parents don't have a lot of money, then they're not around as much, maybe because they're working jobs at night, so they're not there to help with homework, or they're not there to you know take you out and get ice cream and ask you how your day was. So you're not getting those small things that go a long way, um, due to that absence. And then if your parents aren't there to help you with your homework or encourage you to do your homework or tell you the importance of doing your homework, then you're going to get bad grades. And then when you get bad grades, it's harder to get into college. And then if you're not in college, it's harder to get a good paying job with benefits. And now the cycle has just repeated itself where you're struggling. Um, Something else that I thought about was that was said in the reading was that poverty often leads to a lot of stress, depression, and substance abuse in younger people. So if you start using drugs because you're depressed at a young age, now you're addicted to that drug, and you know abusers of drugs may struggle to find jobs, because the only thing that's driving their everyday life is their addiction. So I thought that was interesting. And then you look at the depression aspect of it too, and the stress aspect. If you're stressed as a kid about trying to help out your parents, pay the mortgage, and you're not worried about doing your homework or hanging out with friends and doing things that you know kids need to be doing, then you're not getting what you need to put yourself in a position to be successful down the road. And without those opportunities, it's really hard to do that. And then something else that I found interesting in the essay was they brought up the idea that social support is withdrawn at the age of 18. So if a kid is relying on social support and money from places that aren't just their parents, and then that just ends when they're 18, they're often going to end up homeless, and without enough money to support themselves. So it's really just this repeating cycle within families due to a lack of opportunities and resources.
Yeah, I mean, like I feel like everything that you just said kind of ties back to that video that we watched, the one about the two families, like the two
Yeah.
working class families. Um, like yeah, one of the things that I just like kind of was immediately like thought of as you were saying the sort of aspects about how like the family can potentially break down because of situations like that is where the one family, the dad started working nights and the mom was working days. So like the two of them never saw each other, and the mom would then start taking the son to like his Boy Scout meetings and stuff. And then like as that sort of family progressed throughout the years, like you literally just saw the deterioration of their family. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and then like all of them except for the daughter, I think, basically ended up in like these sort of low paying, like sort of like menial sort of jobs. Um, because like that sort of whole the family situation was kind of like disjointed and situations like that. Whereas it was kind of a little different on the African American family because like they struggled, yes, but they also like maintained sort of
The
like
bond and
yeah,
the
they
connection.
maintained like a strength through it, even though like the sort of same situation was going on. And the one guy ended up graduating from college. The other one joined the Navy. So like it was kind of weird seeing like the sort of juxtaposition between those two families that were in a like the relatively similar situation, and just like how the trajectories of how they were going sort of ended up uh, sort of splitting in that way.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think it is that's kind of like there's one of two ways that it could go, and we saw in the African American family at towards the very end of the video, the one guy was saying, I made a conscious decision to not get married and not have kids until I could fully support myself and I was comfortable on my own because he saw that his parents made that mistake and had 5 kids before they could even support themselves, and now they were in trouble. So it can kind of go the way of, this is what I went through and I don't want my kids to go through the same thing, so I'm going to make a conscious decision to make sure that that doesn't happen. Or it can go the way of, this is what happened to me, this is the only thing I know, this is the way it's going to go. you
mhm.
know? So there's two different sides and two different ways that it can go.
Yeah, it's a kind of it was an interesting documentary.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
all right, let me think. What should we jump into now?
So
I guess we should probably just jump right into the second professor question.
yeah,
Um, so, how is social class related to parenting? How can schools, communities respond to the crisis of unequal schooling?
right. So basically, from what I took away from it, you know, simply put, um, parents that are in better financial situations or are more well off have the opportunity to be better parents, and like I was talking about before, that they're able to help their kids with homework, they're able to attend their children's events because they don't have to work during the night. um, Kids don't necessarily have to hear phone conversations with the bank saying that their house is going to be foreclosed. All of these things, um, that we saw in the video lead to parents not being able to be full-time parents. So it really hinders the relationship between a parent and a child. Whereas um, and then the second part of the question talks about how can schools and communities respond to this unequal schooling or um, things like that. And in the essay, it talked about the program that they called storytelling. which was started by African American and Latino parents, and they basically met up at the school and talked about different methods, and through storytelling came up with ways that things could become more interactive. And this got the parents involved in the school, which then pretty much directly got the parents more involved with their kids, because they met the people that were interacting with their children every single day. So I think that was an interesting method. And then I'm just reading my notes here. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have for that.
Okay. I mean, like, well, I feel like the video about the two families kind of like stuck out to me the most. Um, the other video about like the media and everything was also good, but like it for some weird reason the juxtaposition of those two like working class families like really like lodged itself in my head for some weird reason. Um, but like I mean, in terms of like the outcome, um, like if you look at how like the children of each of those families sort of turned out, um, like the I mean this could potentially just be me sort of like sort of projecting onto these families, but like it seemed to me more like that the African American uh, parents kind of, while they were in like dire straits and everything, they never like really portrayed that to their kids. Like they always kind of like seemed to have this sort of portrayal of like strength and like we're gonna get through it regardless of whatever happens. Whereas the white family kind of like even in like I think the first or second time you see them, the guy was talking about how he wanted to divorce her and everything because like nothing was going right. So like they kind of were. I mean the woman in that situation kind of like was attempting to like sort of chug forward and everything like that, but the guy was just kind of like always seeming like down and things of that nature. So like the way that kind of ended up kind of like I feel like that sort of aspect of like those individual parents kind of because what's it called the African American family, like their kids kind of from what I took out of it, it seems like their kids kind of grew up and sort of like did more productive things. Because I think the daughter of the white family got like an associate's degree and had like a job at the hospital, whereas the other two were one of them was unemployed and I think the other one worked for like a landscaping company.
Mhm.
Um, Whereas the African American kids, like the oldest, well, the oldest was a daughter that you didn't really see all that much. Then there was the oldest son. I think he got a job working in like the court system of his hometown or something like that. Like I said, the other one joined the Navy, and then when he got out, I think he ended up finding a job of some kind. But it was
He,
just like,
he worked in Afghanistan. He was
oh,
essentially,
right, yeah,
because he could make more money staying over there than he could if he came back to America.
which is terribly ironic. But
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, like just like I guess the way that the individual parents kind of held themselves kind
Yes.
of helped lead their kids to a sort of social class that was more than what they were or like was equal to what they were depending on how they sort of held themselves.
Yeah.
um,
There's always this idea of hope with that family.
yeah, yeah. um, yeah, and I mean I found that kind of interesting, but the hmm. Yeah, the second part of that question is a little trying to have like a bit of a think here about how the second part of that question could potentially be answered. I mean, well, I feel like that kind of ties back into our previous discussion of like redlining. Like, like certain schools don't get the funds that are necessary for them because they're in like poor working class areas. Um, and that's kind of like a messed up practice, just like the fact that because you're in a particular sort of area or a particular school district, your kid isn't going to receive the sort of educational benefits that they would if they say traveled like 20 miles out of where they are. Um, but I mean, I think it's more just like we should sort of attempt to invest all of the same sort of educational materials into any school, regardless of race, color, uh, gender, any of that stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So if we want to move on, one of my questions, kind of ties into the idea of school and poverty. So it was, in school, what was your experience with poverty, and how did you see it affect students?
Um, I mean, it's kind of a difficult question because, like, honestly, I would say I was probably the poor kid at my school. um, because I went to uh, Burke. It was like a Catholic high. It's a Catholic high school.
Yeah.
Um, so like it's not funded by the state or anything like that. It's all sort of like you pay like a tuition and all of that sort of stuff. And they actually like implemented like if you want to do like sports of some kind, you have to pay to get into the sport of whatever it is that you're doing. Um, and so my parents were both nurses. So they made a decent amount of money, but the issue was that they had 5 kids and
Hmm.
they sent all of them to Catholic school um, pretty much at the same time. So like while they did make above a certain bracket because they were sending their kids to the Catholic school, they would lose most of that money, and then on top of paying for us to go to the Catholic school, they also paid the sort of public school taxes and everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, so like in that sense, I would say I was probably eating a lot more peanut butter and jelly sandwiches than say like the other kids. Like the other kids that would go there were all like like upper middle class, sort of like wealthy kids. Like one of the kids I went to high school with was the son of Jim Smith Chevrolet, which is like or it was a big car dealership around here.
Yeah.
Um, so like, yeah, I mean, like, I guess in that sense, it was more like I would just literally go into school with like a bagged lunch every day. I never got to really like buy the school lunch. Not that I really ever wanted to, but I guess in that sense, that was probably the extent of that.
Yeah.
Um,
So I mean, my experience, right now anyway, I'm substitute teaching out of school, and a lot of times, I'll be in a class with a teacher who's like the um, extra help teacher because there's kids with behavioral issues, or um, kids who have a tougher time focusing, or kids who need extra help. And sometimes I wonder, like, oh, like I wonder why they need extra help. And after doing these readings and um, looking at these videos, I was thinking, I wonder if these are the kids who are in more um, impoverished situations. So I think that in schools specifically, we see kids have different needs and going through different things because of their social class. Um, so we see it affecting how kids learn and how kids operate on a day-to-day basis in the schools. Um, as far as when I was in high school and middle school, you know, so I went to Spackenkill, which is, generally a pretty middle class school, I would say. But there's a school right down the road in Poughkeepsie that, is pretty underprivileged and impoverished, I would say. And, there's a lot more behavioral issues and fighting, and there's lower grades. And so you can pretty much see the direct correlation between, poor school performance and, having a more difficult time learning when you're living in a more, in a less affluent area per se. Whereas Spackenkill, where the majority is white, middle, upper class, you know, we were rated one of the top public schools in the area. So just strictly based off of the environment and financial situations and social classes, there's pretty direct correlation to school performance and school behavior.
All right. I mean, this doesn't really tie into to schools per se. Well, I guess it kind of does. But so one of my questions was, how does the government play a part in the construction of social class?
Yeah, so I think, and I think it can tie into schools for sure, in the sense that I think systematically our government is based off of racism in a sense, and when those policies are being put into play, schools of schools in areas where the majority of people are Black, those schools are getting less resources. And I think it's the same thing that we've seen, African Americans struggle to get jobs, and white people get jobs more easily than African Americans. Like we saw in the video, the African American mother was working for the company where she was answering phones and selling. I think she was selling real estate.
She was our realtor, yeah.
Yeah, and she was saying that people picked up on the fact that she was African American, and she had an extremely difficult time making sales in more upper class areas, because she felt like there was a lack of trust, that she's Black, I'm not going to trust her in in this housing look search. But then she said, when it came to an inner city area, she more easily was able to sell things. So I think the systematic policies that we have make it more difficult for people of a lower class and for people of color, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the aspect that you were talking about with like the educational system and the government sort of role in that, it also kind of like ties into the school to prison pipeline in that sense. Like I mean, a sort of upper middle class school that is like sort of doing, like, it has better standing and better like educational supplies and things of that nature. I can't imagine that school having like a big school to prison pipeline sort of a problem. Like like so that could in essence be one aspect of it. And it's like, it also just kind of seems like that whole school to prison pipeline aspect is kind of like almost like a way of keeping surveillance of the people prior to them actually going to the prison, which is then another sort of system of surveillance, keeping an eye on sort of like people of color and people of like lower socioeconomic sort of status. Um, it also kind of like that kind of ties into like in the reading there was that bit that's kind of talking about like what's happening like today, like with like children who are attempting to come to America to like experience that sort of social climb, that like that ability to experience the American dream, are basically having their children taken away from them and put in like a different area. Um, so like, yeah, I think in that sense, it's kind of like sort of almost tampering with the aspect of like a social climb. Um, it's also kind of like weird that so I'm taking a Shakespeare class, and one of the things that the teacher continually talks about is like how the term villain came about. So like
Mm,
the term villain actually apparently came or it stems from like a person who was of the lower class in England who was attempting to sort of climb the social stratosphere, and for some reason they termed those people as villains. But yeah, it just kind of like seems like all of that kind of ties into the sort of contemporary aspect of what we're going through right now.
yeah, for sure. I think I think your next question too can kind of relate into this. So if you want to go with that one.
Yeah, so my second question is do you know any sociological theories, and if yes, how do they play into the social class?
Yeah, so I think just looking at, you know, the idea of that we're a capitalistic society definitely feeds right into social class because, you know, we live in a country where, you know, you make your money and what you make you earned, and you know that's kind of how it is versus a more communistic or socialistic outlook of, you know, we're going to put more taxes on people who make a lot more money so that you know everyone's more equal. And you know when we're taught when we deal with capitalism, a lot of times people who were brought up in lower income families stay that way because there's just a lack of opportunities and a lack of resources for them. And you know a lot of people say that, oh, like the poor people, like they're just not working as hard as I am, why should I have to give them my money? Well, a lot of times it's not that they're not working as hard, but they weren't given the same opportunities. You know, they didn't grow up in a family that told them it was important to do their schoolwork and that college was, you know, a lot of times nobody tells um, kids that college is even an option. You know, whereas in more affluent families, people can say, okay, you're supposed to go to college. I'll help you do the applications. I'll pay for the applications. We can pay for college. So it's not necessarily that, you know, people who are poor aren't working as hard, but they're just not given the same opportunities. And, you know, we don't get to choose our parents. We don't get to choose where we're born. We don't get to choose what school we go to necessarily. So that it's nothing that a kid is doing to end up poor. It's just based off of the opportunities and things that he's exposed to.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, the only reason I asked this is because my sister's a sociology major, and she was like explaining a bunch of these sort of theoretical elements to me the other day. Um, and yeah, so like, I mean, it's just kind of interesting because like the general idea, like the whole concept of the American dream, like what they were explaining in the video about, uh, I think it was the video about like the sort of television portrayals of working class
Mm-hmm.
folks, um, and like the whole general they put out this idea of like this is the American dream, and regardless of who you are, or like what your background is, or your race, or any of that stuff, you can achieve that dream. Um, but like like elements going on in the country have that kind of Marxist element to it, where it's just like there's the the bourgeoisie up here, and they control everything, that they like have the ability to sort of like spread out things, and like, okay, so we're going to put like stuff over here into this sort of economic area, and then you have the proletariat who just kind of like works for them,
Right.
in that sense. But I mean, then you've also got like I think she was saying it's Max Weber, where he has like sort of it's different like in terms of the different kinds of like sort of social strata social stratas, um whereas like, in the Marxist element, it's just like the two, you have like the top guys, and then you have like the working class. Weber's had like 7 or 8 different ones. I can't remember all of them, but yeah, it's just kind of like interesting when you start like getting told like these sort of elements about how society kind of like breaks down into like sort of understandable elements. Um, yeah, no, I went off on a tirade again, so yeah, I'm done.
So then you brought up the video that was talking about, television and the middle class. So, and one aspect of that video was, the African American families being portrayed. So my question was, how do you think the portrayal of African Americans on television has changed over time, and how do you think this affects viewers? Um, so,
Oh
so,
no,
so you want me to go ahead?
yeah,
All
you
right.
can.
So, I kind of look at it as, growing up, I didn't see a whole lot of African Americans on television. And like it said in that video from YouTube, when African Americans were on television, they were portrayed as, only in servant roles where they're taken care of or serving to white people, or in roles of entertainment. So, the black guy is the comedian, or the black guy is the saxophone player, things like that. And, I think the effect that has on viewers is, it shows young people of color that, that's all that they can be, like, oh, or another thing is, you see black people portrayed as gang members on TV or in movies, and then that becomes the expectation or the reality for the viewers. They can't look at the TV and be like, wow, I want to be just like that guy who's the president, or I want to be just like that guy, the guy who's working on Wall Street making millions of dollars. So I think it puts these thoughts into the minds of young people of color that, they can't aspire to be things because they're not seeing those things happen on TV. I think over time it has changed a little bit, and there has been, a conscious effort to make that better. We're seeing more movies that have black people in more prominent roles. You look at the Black Panther, where pretty much every character in that movie is of color. And it shows that, black people can be superheroes. And I think of the movie, it's called Concussion, and it features Will Smith as a doctor. Black people can be doctors. So we're starting to see this trend where, black people are being put in more roles on television that are more affluent roles. So I think that's showing younger Black people, like, okay, like I can do this, and Black people can be doctors, Black people can be superheroes, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of my takeaway from that.
Yeah, I mean, no, I absolutely agree with you in terms of like how they've become more predominant in terms of say like films and things of that nature. But like yeah, my outlook of it is like so uh, uh it's the '70s show with JJ. Good times, good times. I used to watch Good Times when I was growing up. Uh, no, that had no relevance to what was going on in this conversation right now. But yeah. So I mean, like you said, yeah. I mean, growing up, I used to watch Holiday Inn with Bing Crosby and uh, that's her, Fred Astaire. There it is. Um, and in that, so it's like the whole general plot concept is Bing Crosby is like a big like singer. Forgot his name again. Fred Astaire is like the dancer. So they're both sort of fighting over this particular woman, but like throughout the whole thing is Bing Crosby ends up leaving Broadway and he goes and buys like this nice house in the middle of like Vermont or something like that, to like a farm. Um, and he's got like the African American servant woman and her two kids, and she's just like the most like it's weird though because like she's the most stereotypical like sort of like southern servant woman, but at the same time she's also like the most intelligent character in the entire movie. Um, because like everything that she says is like completely true. But that's
Right.
just like kind of like the weird dichotomy that they always had back then. But so like yeah, and then as it goes on, you sort of see them turn into like gang members and things like that, or things that you're supposed to be scared of, unless they were incorporated into the sort of mainstream American dream kind of viewpoint. Like yes, we're African American, but we're also basically white people. Like
Right.
we're wearing suits and we made it out of the ghetto and all that stuff. Um, I had a point that I was trying to get to with this. I forgot what it was. Yeah, I mean, or oh, and then yeah, I remember now. So then another big sort of trope that they've fallen into is like the big acting role that they would get is if they played a slave of some kind.
Right.
Like I mean in like 12 Years a Slave, Lupita Nyong'o. I probably just pronounced her name horribly wrong, but like she's a great actress and she literally just plays like a slave who gets raped. Um, and that's like the primary sort of role that African American actors sort of would get into. Same with I'm drawing a blank as to what the name of the movie is, but it's about like a slave ship that the slaves overpower the people like basically steering the ship. And then they end up making it to America, and because they overpowered the people steering the ship and everything, they didn't see themselves as slaves. And then John Quincy Adams ends up like after his presidency, he ends up um, defending them in like a court of law. Yeah, but I mean, like that's the primary thing. Like up into the '90s. Now I think
Right.
it's starting to
Yeah.
yeah, now I think it's starting to sort of open up more into just sort of like everyday African American type of roles where it's not like, oh, you're a slave in this, or oh, you're the funny black person or something to that effect. So I think it's come a long way.
Yeah, for sure. And hopefully it continues to go in the right direction. So that pretty much wraps up everything we have. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Uh, nope, not that I can think of.
All right, sounds good. So do it again in a couple of weeks.
All right, cool deal.